The galaxy belonged to the KTH Empire and everyone knew it. For 3,000 years their massive crystal ships had moved through space like living gods, bringing order to every corner of the known universe. The KTH themselves stood 12 feet tall with skin that looked like blue glass, and strange lights that danced under their flesh whenever they thought or felt something strong. These lights told other KTH exactly what they were thinking, making lies impossible and secrets pointless. Supreme Commander Zethkar stood on the bridge of his flagship, a vessel so large it could hold entire cities inside its crystal walls. The ship was called Eternal Dominion, and it had never lost a battle. Through the clear walls of the bridge, he could see the stars spreading out in all directions like scattered diamonds. Each star represented worlds that now flew the banner of the KTH Empire, worlds that had learned to accept the protection and guidance of their betters. "Another system has joined our empire," Sub-Commander Veltarn reported, his skin glowing soft green with satisfaction. "The Vorthon people surrendered after seeing our ships arrive. They barely had energy weapons and their fastest ships could not even reach the speed of light." Zethkar's own skin shifted to pleased amber colors. This was how things always went. The Empire would find a new world with primitive people living on it. They would send diplomats to explain how much better life would be under KTH protection. When the primitives refused, as they always did at first, the Empire would show them a small demonstration of their power. After that, surrender always came quickly. It had been this way for 3,000 years. The KTH had never found a species that could truly threaten them. Most worlds still used chemical rockets to reach their own moons. Some had learned to split atoms for energy. A few rare ones had discovered how to send messages faster than light. But none had ever developed anything that could challenge KTH technology. The Empire's crystal ships were powered by thought itself. Their weapons could turn entire moons to dust in seconds. Their shields could stop any attack the galaxy had ever produced. Most importantly, the KTH way of thinking was pure logic. They did not fight wars for pride or revenge or any of the other stupid reasons that primitive species used. They fought only when necessary, and they always won quickly with the least possible damage. "Scanner operative Lindor has something interesting to report," Veltarn continued, his patterns shifting to curious yellow. "She has found a new world in a distant spiral arm that shows unusual readings." Lindor stepped forward, her tall frame moving with the grace that all KTH possessed. Her skin showed complex patterns of blue and silver that indicated deep concentration mixed with confusion. "Commander, this world is unlike anything we have encountered before. The planet orbits a yellow star and shows clear signs of advanced civilization, but the electromagnetic signatures are extremely strange." She activated a holographic display that showed a small blue and green world spinning slowly in the darkness. "The inhabitants have developed faster-than-light communication technology, which suggests significant advancement. However, our scans detect not one unified government but dozens of separate political entities. They appear to maintain distinct military forces, and there is evidence of recent large-scale conflicts among different groups of the same species." Zethkar's skin patterns shifted through several colors before settling on deep purple, the color that meant something was very wrong with the universe. In 3,000 years of expansion, the Empire had never encountered a species that fought wars against itself while simultaneously developing space-age technology. It made no sense according to any logical progression of civilization. "They fight each other?" he asked, wanting to make sure he understood correctly. "Yes, Commander," Lindor confirmed. "Our analysis of their communication broadcasts shows historical records of hundreds of conflicts between different groups. Some of these wars involved the entire planet and weapons capable of destroying their whole civilization. Yet they survived these conflicts and continued to advance technologically." Veltarn's pattern showed the deep orange of distress. "How is such a thing possible? Any species that wages war against itself should destroy itself long before reaching the stars. It defies all logical development patterns." Zethkar studied the slowly turning world on the display. Everything about it was wrong according to KTH understanding of how intelligent life developed. Species were supposed to unite under the strongest leadership, accept logical hierarchy, and advance peacefully toward the stars. This world seemed to have done the exact opposite, fighting itself for thousands of years while somehow becoming more dangerous with each conflict. "What is their current technological level?" he asked. "Difficult to assess precisely," Lindor replied. Their fastest ships can barely reach 10% of light speed, and their weapons technology appears to be at least 800 years behind our current standards. However, they have developed some innovations that we have never seen before. They use controlled nuclear explosions for propulsion. They have created artificial intelligence systems that can think independently, and they have built weapons designed specifically to kill large numbers of their own species as efficiently as possible. The bridge fell silent as the implications of this information settled over the command crew. A species that had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of killing itself would have a very different understanding of warfare than any civilization the Empire had ever faced. There is something else, Lindor continued, her patterns now showing silver streaks of deep concern. They call themselves humans, and their broadcasts suggest they are aware of our presence in this galaxy. Some of their governments have been preparing for the possibility of contact with hostile alien civilizations. Zethkar felt something he had never experienced before in his 200 years of life. It was not quite fear, because the Caliph did not understand fear in the way other species did. It was more like the feeling of standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing that the ground might not be as solid as it appeared. Prepare a diplomatic envoy, he ordered finally. If these humans are accustomed to warfare, they may require a more comprehensive demonstration of our capabilities than other species. We will follow standard protocol, but we will be prepared for the possibility that they may not respond logically to our offer of protection. Should we bring additional ships? Veltarn asked. Zethkar considered this carefully. Standard first contact protocol called for a small fleet to demonstrate power, without appearing unnecessarily aggressive. But something about this strange world and its violent inhabitants suggested that normal procedures might not be sufficient. Yes, he decided, bring 12 ships including Eternal Dominion. If these humans have truly spent their entire civilization fighting wars, they may need to see overwhelming force before they understand the wisdom of accepting our guidance. As the Caliph fleet began preparing for its journey to the small blue world, none of them understood that they were about to encounter something that would shatter their understanding of the universe. They had built their entire civilization on the belief that superior technology and logical thinking would always triumph over primitive chaos and emotional decision-making. They were about to discover that 3,000 years of easy victories had not prepared them for a species that treated survival itself as a form of warfare, and that had learned to find strength in the very conflicts that should have destroyed them long ago. The journey to the human world would take several days at maximum speed. During that time, the Caliph would study the strange broadcasts coming from the planet, trying to understand how any intelligent species could have developed in such an apparently self-destructive manner. What they would find was that humanity had not developed despite their violent history, but because of it. Every war had taught them new lessons about adaptation, creativity, and the refusal to accept defeat. Every conflict had forced them to become more clever, more resourceful, and more determined to survive against impossible odds. The KTH Empire was about to meet a species that had been preparing for this moment since the first human looked up at the stars and wondered what else might be out there in the darkness, waiting to test their resolve. The human ship USS Liberty came out of hyperspace near the edge of their solar system, with all its warning lights flashing red. Captain Jake Morrison had been drinking his morning coffee when the emergency alert came through from Earth Defense Command, telling him that 12 massive alien ships had appeared at the system's outer boundary and were moving steadily toward Earth. Morrison was 45 years old and had spent 20 years commanding exploration vessels in the deep black of space. He had seen strange things out there among the stars, discovered 3 new worlds suitable for human colonies, and survived more equipment failures and asteroid storms than most people could imagine. But he had never seen anything like the ships that now appeared on his main display screen. "Lieutenant Rodriguez, what are we looking at?" he asked his sensor operator, a young woman who had joined his crew straight from the Naval Academy on Mars. 12 vessels. "Captain," Amy Rodriguez reported, her voice steady despite the obvious tension. "Each one is at least 3 times the size of our largest battleships. Hull composition unknown. Energy signatures unlike anything in our databases. They're moving in perfect formation at about 60% of light speed." Morrison studied the tactical display while his crew worked frantically at their stations around him. The Liberty was Earth's most advanced exploration ship, equipped with the latest human technology and crewed by some of the best people in the fleet. But looking at those alien vessels, he felt like a man with a wooden club facing down a tank battalion. "Any response to our standard first contact signals?" he asked. Communications Officer Pete Collins shook his head. "Nothing yet, sir. We've transmitted mathematical sequences, star charts, and peaceful greeting messages in 12 different formats. They're definitely receiving our signals, but they haven't acknowledged any of them." Morrison had read every first contact protocol manual that Earth had ever written. The experts all agreed that any species advanced enough to travel between stars would probably be peaceful, since violent civilizations usually destroyed themselves before reaching space. Looking at the alien fleet, he hoped those experts were right. "Sir, incoming transmission," Collins announced suddenly. "It's coming through on multiple frequencies simultaneously. Our computers are working on translation now." The main screen flickered and then showed something that made every human on the bridge freeze in place. The alien stood 12 feet tall with skin that looked like blue crystal, and patterns of light moved under his flesh like living artwork. His eyes were completely black, and when he spoke, his voice carried a tone of absolute authority that made Morrison think of ancient kings and conquering generals. "I am Supreme Commander Zethkar of the KTH Empire," the translated voice said. "Your species has been selected for incorporation into our protective dominion. You will surrender your military assets and submit to our guidance immediately. This is not a negotiation or a request." Morrison looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. He saw Amy Rodriguez gripping her console so hard her knuckles had turned white. Pete Collins was staring at the screen with his mouth open. Weapons Specialist Lisa Parker had her hand hovering over her control panel, waiting for orders that might never come. 20 years of military training kicked in, and Morrison stood up slowly, making sure his voice would carry the authority that his uniform represented. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth vessel USS Liberty. We appreciate you making contact with us, but humanity doesn't surrender to anyone. We're willing to discuss trade agreements, diplomatic relations, or mutual defense treaties, but surrender is not an option." The patterns under the alien skin shifted through several different colors before settling on what Morrison thought might be confusion or surprise. The creature tilted his massive head slightly, as if he had heard something impossible. "Captain Morrison," Zethkar said slowly, "you appear to have misunderstood our communication. This is not a request for negotiation. The KTH Empire has brought order and protection to 17 star systems. No species has ever required more than a single demonstration of our capabilities before accepting the obvious benefits of our guidance. Your resistance is both unnecessary and illogical." Morrison felt something hot and angry rising in his chest, the same feeling he had experienced years ago when pirates had attacked a civilian transport he was escorting. "Commander, let me make something very clear to you. Humanity has been fighting wars since before we discovered fire. We've faced extinction more times than I can count, and we've survived every single challenge by refusing to quit. We don't surrender, we don't submit, and we sure as hell don't accept protection from anyone who shows up in our system making threats." For several seconds, the alien commander said nothing. The patterns under his skin cycled through colors that had no names in human language, and Morrison got the distinct impression that he was experiencing something completely outside his normal understanding. "Captain Morrison," Zethkar finally replied, "you are forcing us to demonstrate our technological superiority. Your vessel's weapons and defensive systems are primitive compared to our capabilities. Stand down immediately and prepare to witness a display of KTH power." Morrison turned to his tactical officer. "Lisa, sound general quarters. All hands to battle stations. And Pete, get me a direct line to Earth Defense Command. Tell them we're about to show our new neighbors what human hospitality looks like." The bridge erupted into controlled chaos as his crew prepared for combat. Damage control teams rushed to their stations. Weapon systems came online with electronic whines and clicks, and the ship's artificial gravity adjusted to combat settings. Through it all, Morrison watched the alien commander on his screen, trying to read something in those black eyes that might tell him what he was really facing. "Sir?" Rodriguez called out. "I'm reading massive energy buildups across their entire fleet. Whatever they're planning to do, it's going to be big." Morrison nodded grimly. In 20 years of space service, he had learned that sometimes you faced problems that couldn't be solved with diplomacy, careful planning, or superior technology. Sometimes you just had to fight with everything you had and hope it was enough. "All stations report ready for combat." "Captain," Lisa Parker announced. "Very well. Morrison said, settling into his command chair. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to make history. Earth is counting on us to show these aliens that humanity doesn't back down from anyone. Let's give them a lesson they won't forget. The Liberty was 1 ship against 12, outgunned and outmatched in every measurable way. But Morrison had something the aliens didn't understand yet. He had a crew that came from a species that had spent thousands of years learning how to fight against impossible odds, and a human tradition that said death was preferable to surrender. As both fleets prepared for battle, neither side fully understood what was about to happen. The Kaleth expected another routine demonstration of overwhelming force followed by logical surrender. The humans prepared for another fight for survival, the kind they had been winning since the first human picked up a rock to defend his family from something bigger and stronger than himself. "Commander Zethkar," Morrison said into his communicator, "you wanted to see what humans are capable of. You're about to find out why we're the only species in the galaxy that fights wars for practice." The battle lasted 18 minutes and changed everything the KTH Empire thought they knew about warfare. Supreme Commander Zethkar watched from his flagship as the human vessel USS Liberty did things that no civilized species had ever attempted. In 3,000 years of galactic history, instead of maintaining proper formation and exchanging directed energy fire like every other species the Empire had encountered, the human ship moved in patterns that seemed to follow no tactical doctrine whatsoever. It spun and rolled through space like a drunken dancer, using its own damaged hull sections as improvised weapons and ramming smaller Kaleth vessels with what appeared to be deliberate suicidal intent. "Sir, they've lost their port engine array, but they're still accelerating toward our cruiser Harmony of Purpose," Sub-Commander Veltarn reported, his skin patterns cycling through distressed orange frequencies that indicated complete confusion. "They're using debris from their own destroyed sections as projectile weapons." Zethkar stared at the tactical display in growing bewilderment. The human ship had suffered catastrophic damage in the first exchange of fire. Its hull was breached in dozen places. Atmosphere was venting from multiple decks, and their main reactor was operating at dangerous overload levels. By all logical standards, the vessel should have surrendered or retreated immediately. Instead, Captain Morrison seemed to be using his ship's destruction as part of his battle strategy. Weapons specialist Lisa Parker had somehow jury-rigged the Liberty's mass drivers to fire everything from hull plating to pieces of furniture at the Kaleth fleet. The Empire's energy shields, designed to deflect coherent beams and conventional projectiles, seemed utterly confused by kitchen appliances traveling at significant fractions of light speed. "They just fired what appears to be exercise equipment at our sensor array," Veltarn continued, his voice carrying tones of disbelief that had no precedent in Kaleth military history. "The impact has disabled our primary targeting system." But what truly disturbed the Kaleth command crew was not the humans' unconventional tactics, but their psychological response to imminent destruction. Instead of the logical fear or desperate attempts at negotiation that every other species had displayed when facing overwhelming force, the human crew appeared to be enjoying themselves. "Sir, we're intercepting their internal communications," Scanner Operative Lindor reported. "They're broadcasting what appears to be recreational music while coordinating their attacks, and their crew members are exhibiting vocal behaviors that our translators are having difficulty processing." Zethkar listened to the translated fragments of human bridge chatter and felt something cold settling in his chest, an emotion for which the Kaleth language had no adequate words. "Parker, did you really just fire the captain's coffee machine at their flagship?" came one voice. "Confirmed hit on their sensor array," replied another. "Want me to try the exercise bike next?" "Rodriguez, angle us toward that debris field." Captain Morrison's voice cut through the chaos. "Let's see how these aliens handle a game of cosmic billiards." The Liberty had lost main power to half its systems, was missing entire sections of its hull, and was being pursued by 11 ships that could have reduced it to atoms in seconds. Yet the human crew was laughing while they fought, treating their desperate battle for survival as if it were some kind of elaborate game. "This is impossible," Zethkar muttered, watching as the crippled human vessel somehow managed to disable 2 more Kaleth ships, using nothing but creative applications of physics and an apparent willingness to sacrifice anything for tactical advantage. No rational species fights like this. The Kaleth had built their entire military doctrine around the assumption that intelligent beings would respond logically to demonstrations of superior force. When faced with certain defeat, any reasonable species would surrender to preserve their lives and negotiate for the best possible terms. The concept of fighting to the death rather than accepting logical submission was so alien to Keleth, thinking that they had no protocols for dealing with it. "Sir, the human vessel is losing structural integrity," Veltarn reported. "Their main reactor is approaching critical overload and they have multiple hull breaches. They cannot possibly continue fighting for more than another few minutes." But even as he spoke, the Liberty executed another impossible maneuver, using the explosion of its own damaged engine section to propel debris into the path of a pursuing Keleth destroyer. The alien ship, caught completely off guard by such a suicidal tactic, suffered critical damage to its navigation systems and spun helplessly out of formation. "Commander Zethkar," Captain Morrison's voice crackled across the communication channels. "You wanted to see what humans are capable of. Let me show you something we learned a long time ago." The Liberty's remaining weapons fired in all directions simultaneously, not at the Keleth ships but at the surrounding debris field that the battle had created. The carefully aimed shots set up a chain reaction of collisions that sent chunks of metal and crystal spinning through space in precisely calculated trajectories. "They're using the entire battlefield as a weapon," Lindor announced with something approaching awe in her voice. "They've turned our own damaged ships into projectiles against us." When the chain reaction finished, 3 more Keleth vessels were disabled or destroyed, and the Liberty hung dead in space with no power, no weapons, and no hope of survival. Standard Keleth protocol now called for the boarding and capture of the defeated enemy vessel, followed by the integration of any useful prisoners into the Empire's knowledge base. "Prepare boarding parties," Zethkar ordered, trying to restore some sense of normal procedure to a battle that had violated every principle of civilized warfare. But Captain Morrison had one final lesson to teach about the nature of human conflict. "Commander Zethkar," his voice came through the static of failing communication systems, "you've seen what one human ship can do when we're trying to be friendly. Remember this moment when you meet the rest of our fleet." The Liberty's self-destruct sequence activated with a countdown that every human crew member could hear echoing through their dying ship. Instead of pleading for rescue or attempting to negotiate for their lives, they used their final moments to sing something their translators identified as an old Earth military song. "We should run," Captain Morrison announced to his crew, his voice carrying across all frequencies. "But we're not going to run. We should surrender, but we're not going to surrender. We're going to show these aliens what it means to threaten Earth." The Liberty exploded in a brilliant flash of light that could be seen from several star systems away. But Captain Morrison had timed the detonation perfectly, and the expanding sphere of superheated plasma and debris caught 2 pursuing Keleth vessels in its embrace, adding their destruction to the final tally of impossible human victory. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Keleth Empire had suffered significant losses in battle. But worse than the tactical defeat was the psychological impact of facing an enemy that treated death as just another weapon to be used against their opponents. "Set course for the homeworld," Zethkar ordered quietly, his skin pattern showing deep purple confusion mixed with something that might have been fear. "The High Council must be informed immediately. We have encountered something that changes everything we thought we knew about the nature of intelligent life." As the surviving Keleth ships limped away from the battle site, they left behind a debris field and the beginning of a war that would reshape the galaxy. Unknown to them, every second of the engagement had been recorded by human deep space monitoring stations throughout the solar system, and the recordings were already being transmitted to every human colony, military installation, and exploration vessel across known space. The message was simple and terrifying. The galaxy's most powerful empire had just declared war on humanity, and humanity was about to show them why that was the biggest mistake anyone had ever made. Admiral Susan Clark stood in the war room of Earth's Global Defense Command, surrounded by holographic displays that showed human colonies scattered across 57 star systems. At 62 years old, she had spent her entire career preparing for this exact moment, the day when humanity would face its first real test against a hostile alien civilization. But even her worst-case scenario planning had not prepared her for an empire that demanded immediate surrender as an opening move. "Captain, Morrison's final transmission came through 6 hours. "Aga," reported Colonel Ryan Beck, Earth's chief military strategist, Analysis of the battle data shows he managed to destroy or disable at least 6 enemy vessels before the Liberty was lost. More importantly, he bought us time and gave us our first real look at their capabilities. Clark studied the tactical information that Morrison and his crew had died to provide. The alien ships were incredibly powerful, with energy weapons that could vaporize a human destroyer in seconds, and defensive shields that seemed nearly impenetrable. But their technology appeared to be built around the concept of overwhelming superiority rather than battlefield adaptation, and their tactics followed rigid patterns that suggested they had never faced serious resistance. "What's our current military readiness across all human territories?" Clark asked. "We have 1,237 combat-capable vessels distributed among our colonies," Beck replied, calling up displays that showed ship positions throughout human space. "Our technology is inferior to theirs in terms of raw power, but we have certain advantages that they don't seem to understand yet." Defense Minister Carol White activated a series of displays showing human military doctrine and historical combat analysis. "Admiral, every aspect of our approach to warfare has been developed through fighting opponents who were bigger, stronger, or better equipped than we were. Our entire military philosophy is built around defeating superior forces through creativity, adaptation, and the willingness to accept heavy casualties in exchange for strategic victories." Clark nodded grimly as she reviewed the data. Humanity had spent thousands of years fighting wars against each other, developing tactics and strategies through conflict with opponents who understood innovation, desperation, and the kind of creative thinking that came from facing extinction. These aliens, despite their overwhelming technological advantages, showed clear signs of tactical rigidity that suggested they had never fought anyone willing to sacrifice everything for victory. "Begin Operation Prometheus," Clark ordered. "Every colony world, every research station, every exploration vessel needs to understand what we're facing and what we're going to do about it. Send them Morrison's battle recordings along with full tactical analysis and immediate mobilization orders." The response from human space was faster and more unified than even Earth's leadership had expected. Within hours of receiving the transmission, colony administrators began converting civilian manufacturing facilities to military production. Research stations shared their most experimental and dangerous technologies. Explorer crews volunteered for suicide missions to gather intelligence on alien positions and capabilities. On the mining colony of New Colorado, Governor Paul Stevens ordered the immediate conversion of the entire orbital asteroid processing facility into a massive projectile launcher capable of hurling space rocks at faster-than-light speeds. His engineers worked around the clock to modify equipment designed for peaceful mining into weapons that could punch holes through alien warships from incredible distances. On Kepler Research Station, Dr. Helen Clark's team abandoned their studies of exotic matter and began developing quantum torpedoes that could phase through normal space-time and appear inside enemy vessels without having to penetrate their shields. The weapons were completely theoretical and had never been tested, but the research team worked with the desperate intensity of people who knew their entire species was depending on them. But the most ambitious project was taking place at Haven Colony, humanity's newest settlement on the edge of known space. The massive colony ship Freedom's Call, originally designed to transport 10,000 settlers to their new home, was being converted into something that no other species in galactic history had ever attempted to build. Captain Danny Walsh, who had been the colony's civilian administrator just days before, now found himself commanding a vessel that barely resembled its original design. The cargo holds had been filled with every experimental weapon that human science could produce. The passenger decks had been converted into combat stations. The ship's entire purpose had been transformed from bringing life to new worlds to bringing death to anyone who threatened humanity. "Admiral Clark," Walsh reported from Haven's orbit. "Freedom's Call is ready for Phase 2 operations. We have 2,000 volunteers aboard from colonies throughout this sector. All our experimental weapons systems are online, and we've loaded the special cargo you requested." Clark reviewed the mission parameters one final time before giving her authorization. The plan was tactically insane, strategically brilliant, and psychologically devastating in ways that only a species with humanity's history of warfare could have conceived. "Captain Walsh, you are authorized to begin the demonstration. Show the KTH Empire what happens when they make the mistake of threatening our homes. Across human space, similar preparations were taking place with the kind of systematic efficiency that could only come from a species that had been preparing for total war since the first human tribes had faced extinction and chose to fight rather than surrender. Every human colony, research station, and exploration vessel was being transformed into a weapon aimed at the heart of an empire that had never faced real opposition. The Freedom's Call departed havens, orbit carrying enough firepower to destroy small moons, crewed by volunteers who understood they were probably going to die, and loaded with a cargo that no alien civilization had ever used as a weapon of war. In addition to the experimental weapons and volunteer crew, the ship carried something that Captain Walsh knew would be far more devastating than any bomb or energy beam. The cargo holds contained the complete cultural heritage of humanity. Every piece of music ever composed, every work of art ever created, every book ever written, and every historical record of human civilization. It was a database that told the story of a species that had created beauty while committing genocide, written love songs during world wars, and painted masterpieces while their cities burned around them. All systems ready, Admiral, Walsh reported as his ship prepared to jump to hyperspace. We're going to show these aliens what they're really fighting against. Clark watched the tactical display as the Freedom's Call disappeared into hyperspace, carrying with it humanity's response to the Kaleth ultimatum. The ship was heading directly for the heart of the alien empire, not to negotiate or surrender, but to deliver a message that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Colonel Beck, she said quietly, notify all human commanders that Phase 2 is now active. Tell them that Captain Morrison and his crew have given us the opening we need, and that it's time to show the galaxy why threatening humanity is the last mistake any empire will ever make. The war had begun in earnest, and humanity was about to demonstrate that their greatest weapon was not their technology or their numbers, but their absolute refusal to accept defeat from anyone who thought they could simply demand submission from a species that had earned their place among the stars through thousands of years of refusing to surrender to anyone or anything. The Battle of Kaleth Prime lasted 3 days and became the most studied military engagement in galactic history, not because of the tactics involved or the technology displayed, but because it marked the moment when the galaxy learned that humanity was fundamentally different from every other species that had ever reached the stars. Captain Danny, Walsh brought the Freedom's Call out of hyperspace directly above the Kaleth homeworld. Appearing without warning in the middle of the most heavily defended system in the known galaxy, the massive converted colony ship faced a fleet of 300 Kaleth vessels, orbital defense platforms that could destroy entire moons, and planetary shields strong enough to stop asteroid impacts. Attention, KTH Empire, Walsh announced across all communication frequencies as his ship began its impossible mission. This is Captain Danny Walsh of the human vessel Freedom's Call. We're here to teach you about the species you decided to threaten. The transmission that followed was unlike anything any civilization had ever used as a weapon of war. Instead of threats or demands for surrender, the humans began broadcasting their entire cultural heritage directly into the Kaleth communication network, accompanied by real-time footage of the ongoing battle. Supreme Commander Zethkar, observing from his flagship in orbit around Kaleth Prime, watched in growing confusion as the human ship transmitted Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, while simultaneously firing experimental quantum torpedoes that phased through Kaleth shields as if they did not exist. The music was followed immediately by tactical data showing the complete destruction of 6 Kaleth outposts that had been eliminated by human forces in the past week. Sir, they're broadcasting what appears to be artistic expression while conducting military operations, Sub-Commander Veltarn reported, his skin patterns cycling through colors that had no equivalent in Kaleth emotional vocabulary. Our analysts cannot determine any logical connection between these cultural transmissions and their tactical objectives. The Freedom's Call had suffered massive damage in the opening moments of the engagement, with hull breaches across 30% of its structure and main power failing throughout multiple sections. But Captain Walsh continued his mission with the systematic determination that characterized human approaches to warfare, even when facing impossible odds. Kaleth Fleet, Walsh transmitted as his ship executed maneuvers that should have been impossible for a vessel of its size. You wanted to understand human capabilities. We're a species that composed symphonies while our cities were being bombed, painted masterpieces while fighting for our survival, and wrote poetry about love while perfecting the art of killing our enemies. The tactical display showed something that violated every principle of civilized warfare that the Kaleth had developed. Over 3,000 years of galactic dominance, the Freedom's Call was using its own structural collapse as a weapon, timing the destruction of damaged sections to maximize debris impact on pursuing vessels. At the same time, the human crew was broadcasting Earth's greatest works of art while providing detailed technical specifications for every weapon they were using against the Kaleth fleet. They're giving us their military secrets, Veltarn announced with obvious bewilderment. But they're also transmitting cultural works that demonstrate psychological complexity far beyond our current understanding of intelligent behavior. What the Kaleth could not comprehend was that humanity was demonstrating the fundamental relationship between creation and destruction that had driven their species since the beginning of their civilization. The same minds that had composed Bach's fugues had designed fusion weapons. The same culture that had produced Shakespeare's plays had perfected the science of total warfare. The capacity for art and the ability to wage war were not contradictory aspects of human nature, but expressions of the same underlying drive to impose meaning on an indifferent universe. When the Freedom's Call finally lost all power and began its death spiral toward the surface of Kaleth Prime, Captain Walsh activated the ship's final weapon. It was not a bomb or an energy beam, but something far more devastating. A complete transmission of human history directly into the Kaleth Empire's central communication network. In the space of 18 seconds, every Kaleth in the galaxy experienced the entirety of human civilization. They saw the wars, the peace treaties, the acts of creativity and destruction, the moments of beauty and horror that had shaped humanity's journey from primitive hunters to spacefaring conquerors. They witnessed a species that had faced extinction dozens of times and had responded to each crisis by becoming stronger, more adaptive, and more determined to survive. The psychological impact was immediate and catastrophic. The Kaleth, who had built their entire worldview on the principle that superior technology guaranteed victory, suddenly understood that they faced an enemy whose greatest strength came from their familiarity with defeat, adaptation, and survival against impossible odds. Supreme Commander Zethkar, accessing the human historical database through his ship's communication systems, experienced something that had no precedent in Kaleth psychology. It was not fear of death or defeat, but terror of an opponent that treated both creation and destruction as equally valid responses to the challenges of existence. Send an immediate message to the human homeworld, Zethkar ordered, his skin patterns displaying colors that had no translation in any known language. The Kaleth Empire proposes immediate diplomatic negotiations. For the first time in 3,000 years, the galaxy's most powerful military force was asking for peace talks with what they had originally considered a primitive species. The offer came not from a position of strength, but from the sudden understanding that they had declared war on something fundamentally more dangerous than any technology or weapon system, Admiral. Clark's response came 12 hours later and surprised even Earth's own leadership. Instead of accepting the diplomatic overture or negotiating terms of surrender, she transmitted a message that carried the weight of human history and the promise of human determination. Commander Zethkar, Clark's voice carried across the void between civilizations. You declared war on a species that has been preparing for this moment since we first looked up at the stars and wondered what else was out there. Your surrender will be accepted, but the negotiations will be conducted according to human terms, at a human location, with human conditions. Welcome to Earth, where we'll teach you what peace looks like when it's built by people who understand war. The age of Kaleth dominance had ended not through superior technology or tactical brilliance, but through humanity's most dangerous characteristic, their ability to find strength in adversity and create meaning from conflict. The war was over, but the galaxy would never be the same. 6 months later, the Kaleth Empire signed the Terra Accords in a conference room overlooking the rebuilt ruins of New York City, where the scars of humanity's ancient wars served as a reminder of what species could accomplish when they refused to accept limitations imposed by others. The galaxy had learned that the universe's most powerful forces were not energy weapons or faster-than-light travel, but creativity, determination, and the absolute refusal to surrender to anyone who thought they could demand submission from a species that had earned their place among the stars through 10,000 years of proving that survival was not a gift to be granted, but an achievement to be won through blood, sweat, and the kind of stubborn determination that turned defeat into victory and made legends out of ordinary people who simply refused to quit.